Hello, I'm James Henry, and this is The Message.
The Message.
We're in the second week, as I mentioned at the beginning of worship, the second week in our series about visioning for the church for the future. What does God want for us? What does God see for us? And part of it is because we're looking to the possibility of moving somewhere else physically in terms of our location, but because also as the church, we need to always be asking ourselves, what does it mean for us to be church? How are we being church? How can we be church wherever we are, wherever we go, whatever we do? And so I came upon this wonderful story in the Gospel of Mark. It's one of those stories that you've probably heard before. It has two pieces to it. We only read the first piece. The second piece is when Jesus pulls his disciples aside and gives them an explanation of what each kind of ground represents. But I thought that as I looked at this particular passage, that first section really said a lot about the way that the gospel works. The way that it is called upon for us, the good news that we have inside of us. The first thing that we hear, of course, Jesus is gathering folks and he's teaching them in parables. And the very first thing he says is that a farmer goes out. A farmer goes out. Now that may seem like a simple little phrase. Of course the farmer goes out. Not going to scatter the seed inside the house. You could, I suppose, if you have a dirt floor, but guess what? Probably not enough sun, probably not going to grow. So you're not going to scatter the seed inside your house. You have to go out. Well, the truth of the whole thing boils back down to that's what we're called to do. We gather in this place once a week, but if you think about it, you are worshiping God for 167 hours a week, not in this building, somewhere else. Just like the farmer goes out, you go out. You go out with purpose, you go out with direction, you go out into the world where all the possibility exists. Certainly it's a wonderful thing to gather in a place. But you know, the original word for church in Greek, ecclesia, I really hate it when I use words because it makes it sound like I'm trying to sound all snooty, but the truth is the original word that we now use for church really meant gathering. It didn't mean a place. It didn't mean a building. Buildings for churches that were specifically church buildings didn't happen until the 300s. Was it that the church didn't exist for like 400 years because they didn't have buildings? Absolutely not. They existed as a gathering of people, just like I'm looking at a gathering of people. It is the people that are the church. Did you ever grow up, if you grew up in Sunday school like me, you know, here's the church and here's the steeple, you open the door and there's all the people. You know, that's what I learned in Sunday school class. The truth is, you know, this is not the church. This is the church. The people. This is the church. So as the farmer goes out, so we must go out into the world. We go out into the world to do what? To scatter the seed. Now, I found it interesting as I looked at this passage about scattering the seed that it seems kind of haphazard and careless. I don't know if you know much about farming. Maybe all of you are farmers, and I'm speaking to people. It's like talking to the choir. But I suspect that some of you maybe aren't farmers. But when you plant seeds, you usually are pretty specific. You hold the ground. You don't just throw it around. Now, ancient farming techniques were that they did sort of throw it around a bit. But it seems like this farmer is not careful at all. He's scattering seed, and it ends up in 4 places, only one of which produces any food. What kind of farmer scatters the seed? Well, one who is more caring than careful. More caring than careful. You and I have the opportunity every day to be the farmer scattering the seed of good news. The good news of hope, the good news of love, the good news of joy, the good news of possibility, the good news that says every one of you is made in the image of God. Every one of you has the fingerprints of God all over you. That's what makes you who you are. You're unique and with a purpose. And if somebody tries to tell you, whether it's a magazine or an advertisement or somebody you know, including your parents, your children, or anyone else, that you need to be a different person, you need to look carefully to be sure that you're not marring the very creation you are meant to be, that God made you to be. God made you exactly who you are. God wants you to be who you are and to live that out in your everyday life. So this scattering goes on. You go into the world, you scatter from this place, and you have the opportunity to encounter people that are both going to receive you in wonderful ways and who are not going to receive you in wonderful ways. You might not know this or recognize this about me, but I'm sort of outgoing. I will talk to just about anybody. There's no such thing as a stranger to me. In fact, sometimes strangers wished they could be strangers to me after they've met me. But when I go for a walk, and I go for a walk just about every day, I pass all sorts of people when I'm out walking. Some of them are startled beyond belief when I say, "Good afternoon, how are you today?" And they're like, I'm walking, I'm continuing to walk, and they're like looking at me as I go by, like, what kind of a crackhead is that guy? But some of them respond, but every once in a while they look at me, they harden their face. Well, I can't control what happens when I scatter the seed of hope and love and approval and open the door for conversation. That's what scattering is all about. Now, one of the things I think about when I think about scattering too, when I said to you it's more about caring than being careful, it's also that we live in a world that is driven by something that is truly a myth. And that myth is that our resources are scarce. The myth of scarcity. We believe there's only a little bit to go around. There's only just enough love from God for all of you sitting in this room. If you didn't make it this morning, if you're only watching online, sorry, not enough for you. Well, the truth is, that's a myth. There's more than enough love for everybody. You don't have to hoard it to yourself. I always wondered when I first married Linda and we talked about children, and then, a year and a half later, along came Hannah. I thought, hey, I didn't know if I'd have enough love to go around. And sure enough, when Hannah was born, there was plenty of love for me to give to Hannah. And then we found out we were pregnant again, and here comes Josh, and I didn't know if I'd have enough love to give to Josh because I'd already given all this ton of love to Hannah, and lo and behold, Josh is born. He's a whole other person. There's plenty of love to give there. We talk about periodically on and off about whether we ought not to adopt a child along the way. Josh told us absolutely not. Absolutely not. He wants to always be my favorite son and Hannah be my favorite daughter. Now, Hannah says, I just want a sister. And I know you guys aren't, I don't want to start from scratch. I'm not interested in having to, be the babysitter until she grows up. I want a little sister. So could you maybe adopt one, 14, 15 years old? She even pulled up an online catalog of children up for adoption and said, I like this one. The truth is, we find, if you have ever loved anyone in your life, if you've ever shared love with someone else, that there's always a little bit more to go around. You meet someone else new, there's more love. The myth that there is not enough love from God for everybody in the whole world is just not true. There's plenty of love for everybody. In fact, what I absolutely believe is you will never meet in your lifetime a person who is not already loved by God. They may not know it. That's part of what the scattering of the seeds is all about. They may not have yet discovered God loves them right where they are, and they need that discovery. They need some help, and you're the help. You are the help. You're the farmers that are out there scattering this hope and this love so that people can discover that indeed they are lovable, that they're already loved by God, and perhaps if they're already loved by God, they have the capacity because of God to love somebody back. To love somebody back. So don't let the myth of scarcity, that there's not enough going around, become your truth. Because there's plenty of love to go around. There's also plenty of other kinds of things. I was listening to a report the other day, about scarcity in the world. And that, I was listening to a very large seed-producing company say that they're trying to help produce more food in the future because there's going to be more people that need to eat. And the truth is, we already produce enough food right now that every person in the world could eat and have enough. Do you know that 40% of what we produce in the United States gets thrown away? 40% of what we consume. And it's all because we live in this bizarre myth of scarcity and because we have weird taste. If you go to the farmer's market and there's one tomato left there, you know what the likelihood is? You won't buy it. You won't buy it because you'll assume something's wrong if there's only one left. Not that they were all so great that all the rest are gone and there's one left. So farmers have to pick way more than they can imagine you'll ever use, because it has to always look like there's a million tomatoes there or potatoes there, because you won't buy the last one. But you'll buy it if there's a whole pile. And then at the end of the day, what do they have to do with the pile? Well, if they can't sell them tomorrow, then we all know about produce. It only lasts a little while. It gets thrown away. 40% of what we produce in the United States gets thrown away. Don't you think there's somebody? Now, I always used to use that line with my parents when they would say, you know, there are starving children in the world. Eat all that stuff on your food. And I'd say, well, can we box it up and send it to them? You know, that was always my smart alecky way to get myself in trouble and go to my room without the rest of my supper and sit quietly in my room and think about what I had just said. But the truth is, if we had better distribution methods and we weren't so corrupt in our world, there's enough food for everybody to eat. We produce enough meat and vegetables for everybody to eat. So that's a myth. But we also, God's love is endless. There's plenty of it to go around. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Our God is a loving God that has room for us all. Well, the last piece of it that I discovered as I was sort of looking at this carefulness is as I began to think about this farmer, this calling, this direction on our lives, is also something that we feel a great deal of responsibility about. And that is, what is someone's response going to be? You know, when I told you all about that outgoing, gregarious nature I have when I'm taking a long walk and I talk to somebody who clearly would just like to be quietly walking by me and not be, is quite shocked oftentimes that I speak to them. Well, the truth is, I can't control how somebody else responds. I can't control it when I share the love of God. I can't control when I share good news or hope with anybody else. I can't control that. It's not up to me to control it. You know, the church has thought for a period of time, especially since the Enlightenment, that we needed to have a good reasoned argument that would win somebody over to the logic of following God. And I'll just tell you right now, there's not a lot of logic in following God. There's no logic in endless love for everybody. There's no logic in, I will give you everything if you will simply respond by loving me back. There's no logic to that. So if you think that you can argue somebody to your side, you're wrong. The years and the idea of arguing somebody into believing God is contradictory in nature. But if I know I'm not responsible about how you respond to what I say, as long as I'm talking about God's love and embrace and invitation to know Him more deeply and to fall in love with Jesus and to live your everyday life in His window, if you choose not to, that's up to you. I don't have to feel responsible for your... Now, you know, I have to feel responsible if I'm not very good at scattering seeds, if I'm terrible at it, if I'm mean about it. If I tell you God will love you, if only you come to church on Sunday morning, if only you listen to me online, if only you give me $100 million right out of your pocket right now, I'm sure you're carrying it in loose change. You know, if only. There's not an if only with God. So if I get bad at giving love away on God's behalf, then that is my responsibility. But as long as I give it away in the free way God already gave it to me, I'm not responsible for how you respond. You're not responsible if you're kind to a person in Target and they aren't kind back to you. That's not your responsibility. You can only be yourself. You can only exercise the free will God has given you. You can only scatter the seed. It doesn't say the farmer scattered the seed and then took inventory. Now it does sort of give you an inventory. He threw some on the pathway and you're thinking, what a tremendous waste. That just gets eaten by the birds. Then he throws some and it ends up on the rocky soil. And it's, shallow soil. So it like springs up but gets fried up by the fire of the sun. Gone. Then there's some more that he's not paying attention. He throws some among the thorns and the thorns choke it out when it grows up. Should have been paying attention. But somehow, on the balance, when he gets it onto the good soil, it produces 30 times what it should, 60 times what it should, 100 times what it should. So you can't worry about whether or not that's thorny ground over there, or that's pathway ground over there, the birds are going to eat it. You can't worry about that. You aren't responsible for that. You are, however, responsible to share this love that God has given you. You are responsible to be the farmer that scatters the seed. You are responsible to leave this place not only having enjoyed an entertaining message by James, hopefully entertaining, maybe not, and some music and communion and things like that, but also to go and scatter the seeds of hope and love wherever you go. So go out, scatter, and trust that God can work, that there's enough love, and maybe this is one of the corollaries about why you're afraid to give away love, is because you're afraid if you give some away, there won't be enough back for you. Do you ever feel like if you give some love away, maybe you'll miss out on something, that something won't come your way? You don't have to worry about that, because God's love is big enough for everybody. Do you know there's enough love in God? There must be, because everyone is already loved in the world. And if all of us were doubled in the number, there would still be enough love in God to go around, because God is the very fabric and ocean, as we talked about last week, in which we swim. So what is to be our message? What is to be our hope? I told you last week what I absolutely believe is true, and that is we are entering a new time. About every 500 years since the birth of Christianity, history has a crack in it. Phyllis Tribble, who wrote a book called The Great Emergence, says that every 500 years, the church has a big rummage sale. We get everything together and decide the things, oh man, I can't believe that we thought that was important. Let's sell that off. We'll get rid of that, and we start something new. The last big crack was what we call the Great Reformation. That's when we decided that authority didn't rest with church hierarchy, it rested with the Bible. Well, we're in that breaking time right now where we're trying to figure out what is the authority, what is going to be the authority in our lives. Is God ultimately authority, and how does He communicate that authority? Is it through church hierarchy? Is it through me? Is it through you? Is it through the Bible? Is it through all of those means altogether? If this is a time when things are breaking, and there are a lot more people who are finally admitting they could have been there all along, but they're finally comfortable to admit, I don't believe anything. I don't go to any church. I don't care for any church. Most of them are a bunch of hypocrites, which is probably true, because everyone I know is a hypocrite. They say one thing and sometimes do another. I taught my children one thing. I can't tell you how many times they caught me doing something else. And I had to say, do as I say, not as I do. That didn't work in my house. If you've ever met Hannah and Josh, you know absolutely that didn't cut it. That didn't cut it. But Dad, we need to go and apologize to that other driver because you called them a bad name and you've hurt them for their feelings and you've hurt God's feelings. And I said, well, let's just apologize to God, because if I get out of the car and go to the other driver who didn't hear me say the mean thing in the car that I said and apologize to them, I'm really sorry that I called you an absolute, total, depraved idiot because of your driving. I'm sorry. Then the next thing you know, there'd be a fight in the street, and then there'd be a headline on the front of the Washington Post, pastor calls someone depraved idiot and beats him up on the side of the road. It wouldn't be good for church growth. People would say, you know what? That's what church is really all about. Pastors out beating people up and calling them depraved idiots. I think sometimes that's what people think church is, because they see it from the outside and think that's what we are. You got to do something different. You got to be the farmers that spread a different word. You've got to be, whether you're outgoing or not, find ways to be kind. And sometimes they're very quiet ways. Sometimes they're secret ways that very few people know about, and then the pastor has the audacity to bring it out so other people see it. You know, every Sunday morning when we gather in this place currently, somebody Today it happened to be Janice, made us delicious food that we could eat and made coffee so that we could drink it. And she did that kind of behind the scenes. You may not have known that this week was Janice's week. You know, you happen to know that this week the tech person who's making this thing work is my wife. She happens to be sitting back there. I told her earlier that this was way too loud. Fix it. You know, I'm constantly telling my wife to fix things. And if you know Linda, she does. Actually, she does. I mean, I've never known her not to be able to fix something. And if she can't, she turns it back on me and says, well, I can't fix it. You have to fix it. And, of course, I do. Or get somebody else or hire someone to do it. But in all sorts of small ways, you can share the love of God in unexpected and dancey kinds of ways that no one else may know. One of my favorite foods in the world is hated by 3 other members of my household, which is good when there's some of it around. Pickled beets. When Bob discovered that I loved pickled beets, and he made pickled beets, and he secretly, which is no longer a secret, brought me pickled beets, canned pickled beets that I have eked out over a long period of time because they're delicious and I love them, and nobody else in my family loves them, so we never have them. Except Bob made me some, and I have some. But you see, he shared the love of God with me in a secret kind of way that he probably didn't even want you all to know about. Sorry, Bob. I should have asked Bob's permission first. It's too late now. I can't take it back, you know. Open mouth, insert foot. I can just do it in a second. But you see, in little ways, you don't know what the little ways are. You see somebody struggling to get a door open. Can you open the door? You know, you see somebody, you know, battling with some kind of, you know, trying to keep 10 children in tow and pushing a cart and a stroller and everything else. Can you help them? Can you help them in some way? Can you open a door? Can you say a kind word when you see that cashier behind the counter at Walmart has just had one too many complaints? You know, that's one thing I think Americans, if we're not good at anything else, we can complain like nobody's business. We have complaining down to like a science. We can be unhappy with how fast the cars are going in the lane. We can be unhappy with how slow they're going. We can be happy that they're in our lane. We can be unhappy that they're in someone else's lane. We can be unhappy that they ever got a license and are allowed to drive. We can be unhappy about just about anything and complain about it and be sad. What would it take to somehow lift that person at the Walmart customer service counter up with just a word of greeting? How are you doing today? Well, it's been one of those days. I can see it on your face. I can tell that it's been one of those days for you. Sorry that you've had that kind of a day. I hope when you get your next break you can step outside where it's nice and breezy and cool. How hard is it for you to say something like that? Well, you'd have to get out of the way. And in the end, farming and scattering seeds is about getting out of the way. It's about me not being the obstacle so you can see the love of God. I know I'm an obstacle sometimes. If you've ever driven behind me or in front of me or near me, I was a terrible obstacle. You know, I have a lot of clergy friends who have wonderful tags on their car that say clergy person, pastor, clergy on call, something like that. You will never see one of those on my car. Because I refuse to represent Jesus in that way. I'm getting better. I'm getting better. I actually let people in front of me sometimes. I regret it almost always, but I do let them in front of me. I am kind to people in strange ways. I do speak to strangers and make them my friends, at least for a moment. What kind of gifts do you bring to the table? What kind of seeds can you scatter? Sure, you can make a bad thing worse, but can you make a bad moment better? Sometimes that'll require stepping out of the way. So, go out. That's what the farmer had to do. Can't stay in the room. Scatter. Get over the myth of scarcity because there's plenty of love to go around. And remember, God is already with you and you're not responsible for the response of the other. Just with sharing the seed. So go do it. That's God's image for the church.